Today I'm joined by Dr. David Edgington, who's the founder and executive director of Compassionate Counselors. He's a pastor, he's a biblical counselor, and an author. And I believe he's authored 5 books. And for more than 3 decades, Dr. Edgington has served in pastoral ministry, in which he has trained church leaders in biblical counseling, both in the U.S. and internationally. And with his latest book, White Knights and Reviling Wives, which is through New Christendom Press, which I actually just finished last night. It was a great read. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
You often address like some of the overlooked issues that can happen in marriage when it comes to issues of manipulation, verbal abuse, fear-driven control, which I felt like was a big kind of theme that I noticed with the reviling wife. And so I figured what we'll do today is talk about biblical patriarchy, complementarianism, and egalitarianism, and then as well as male headship, submission, which is a dirty word nowadays, and covenant authority. So, with all that being said, welcome to the show. I appreciate you coming on the show, Dr. Edgington. How are you?
Great. Thank you. It's very, very good to be here. Good to meet you, Zechariah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I really loved the book, and I finished it just in time. I watched several of your interviews, from the King's Hall to the Lone Bulwark with Stephen Wolfe,
Right.
and I just appreciated your approach, and then not only your pastoral care when talking about this matter, but just the sensitivity around it. Like I don't feel like you don't mince words, but you also don't. What do I want to say? You don't want to be like, you don't come across like overbearing or like this needs to be authoritarian in our mindset as men.
Right.
So what inspired you to write White Knights and Reviling Wives, which I love the title, by the way. I don't know how you came up with that.
Well, it's actually the book that I wrote 11 years ago, The Abusive Wife, was what kind of fostered the White Knights and Reviling Wives. And the subtitle is How Feminism Destroys Families. And the original book, The Abusive Wife, once I started talking on podcasts with a few people about that, it really just exploded because it's an issue that nobody talks about. Nobody wants to address. Very few people understand it. But then the ones that do understand it don't really want to speak up about it and address it. And yet, what I was seeing, and I'm a full-time nouthetic counselor, as you mentioned, and also a senior pastor. What I had been seeing was so many families just ripped apart and just destroyed. And I noticed that no one was talking about this issue. So that was what started the Abusive Wife, the book that I wrote, the first book that I wrote. And then in the subsequent years after I wrote that, I found after counseling hundreds of these situations, I think as of today, I probably have counseled over 500 of them at least. I just kind of stopped counting. But it's not just one or two. It's not just, well, this church or a bad church here or bad church. I mean, it's widespread. It's across all churches, all denominations, all theologies. Um, it's in Reformed, it's in Arminian, it's in Catholic, it's in Eastern Orthodox. It's across the board. There's no denomination that is immune to this. But I found that still, even 10 years later, no one was talking about this. So I thought, I've learned a lot in those intervening years between The Abusive Wife and the White Knight book. And I had to write even more about it because I was originally just going to modify The Abusive Wife in kind of an expanded edition. And then I recognized there was so much more material that I needed to put in. It was a whole new book. So New Christendom approached me about publishing the book, and I was grateful for that. And the book has done very well, gotten a lot of attention. Um, the counseling was busy before that book came out, and now it's even more busy. Now it's just off the charts. And the other thing, Zechariah, is this problem is not just in America. This is nationwide. It's worldwide.
Yeah, I saw that
This
you've counseled like couples in Russia,
Yep.
Belarus, Czech Republic, I believe. So
Correct.
yeah,
Correct. And
that's
even our friends up in Canada too. I counsel a lot of people in Canada that have this problem, but yeah, the Netherlands, Iceland, I mean, it's almost like countries that can't stop naming all the countries. So it's not an American problem; it's a spiritual problem, and it's a problem that has infected the body of Christ, the church at large. And we have to wake up to this because it's the other problems we're seeing in the church are kind of downstream from this issue. In other words, the white knight issue, and probably should define what that term means in case the listeners are not familiar with it.
yeah. If you wouldn't mind just defining white knight, reviling wife,
Riley wives,
and
yeah,
then we'll probably get into patriarchy, complementarianism, and egalitarianism. What was
sure,
surprising to me when reading the book is, I mean, I felt like I didn't like I kind of had a cursory understanding of what complementarianism is, and I kind of just assumed that I was in that bucket. But as soon as I read your book, I was like, oh no, I definitely lean biblical patriarchy.
right,
And that's really offensive today, but I think it's interesting because I feel like when things aren't that way, they're a little bit more of a matriarchy where you
yes,
don't have this balance. It usually ends up being one or the other. But yeah,
yes,
if you
you're
wouldn't
right.
mind defining that for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. The terms in the title of the book are very important to understand. Some of the terms are familiar. Some people are not familiar with them. I'll start with the idea of the reviling wife. So the reviling wife is a woman that uses her words as a non-contact weapon. So she's harsh, she's bitter, she's controlling, she's unsubmissive. She wants things to be her way, and a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of women like that that have been trained to be that way because of the feminist infiltration, not only in society but also in the church. And so there's two different types of the what I would call the rebellious wife. There's the one that reviles, and she's like I was describing, harsh and cruel and unrepentant about that. But then there's the other type of rebellious wife that's more passive, and she is quiet and she just resists and says, "No, I just won't do that." A husband may want her to do something very innocent, and she says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And maybe she has a job, and her husband says, "I'd rather you stay at home with the children and let me provide for the family." She says, "No, I'm going to keep working." Yeah, so it's a passive type of resistance, and yet it's still a rebellion against God's order. And God's order is the patriarchal view, which says that the word patriarch simply means father rule. It's two Greek words that are put together. It's not oppressive. It's not harsh. It's not cruel. Just because we use the word rule does not mean it's a wicked type of a rule. So so this is the first piece of the puzzle, that the reviling wife is a much more common problem than we realize. Even after all of the podcasts I've done, all the talking I've done, all of this that's happened, we're still not seeing the problem. And this is why. It's because of the second word, the white knight. So the white knight is the man that is involved in the counseling of this family. He could be a pastor, he could be a counselor, he could be an ACBC counselor like myself, a nouthetic counselor, and he defends the wife. So in other words, if the wife is angry, he says, "Well, husband, what did you do to make your wife so angry?" Or if the wife is riddled with fear and then she gets angry, he says, "Well, why are you frightening your wife so much?"
Even though the fear may be completely unreasonable,
Right. It
where
may be
it's
an
just unwarranted.
completely irrational fear, and yet the husband gets blamed. But then when the husband is angry or the husband is, fearful, well, why are you so angry, husband? So, this is just a simplified version of it, but it's an epidemic in the church. The white knight not only does not accurately give a diagnosis of the problem in the marriage, but he actually blames the wrong person. So you think about it, you have a man that's coming to get help because he can't get his wife to follow him just in simple things. We're not talking about sinful following. In other words, not the husband wants the wife to sin, and it's a wicked thing. It's not that at all. It's just in simple everyday things, and the wife says, "No, I won't do that." So he's coming for help because he can't resolve the problems with his wife. He goes to his church, which is exactly what he should do. Goes to the pastor, and the pastor not only does not help him, but the pastor actually blames him for the problem. So it's like, wait, I'm trying to get some help. Well, you're the one that's the problem. So
Do you
the crushing burden on the poor man from his wife, and then from the pastor, and then if it gets to the courts, if the marriage is getting dissolved, now he's going to get ripped apart in the courts as well. It's absolutely devastating. So this is the dynamic. And the other part, how feminism destroys families, the reason I use the word families there is because the children in these homes, those are the ones that are affected the most. And there's a term called parental alienation. I have a whole chapter in the book on this, where the wife will turn the children against the father. He's not a good man. He's not a good father. He's abusive to me. He's not someone you want to follow. You don't want to trust him. But it's all part of the plan of the reviling wife to turn the children against the father. And then the father often loses all contact with his children. Some of these fathers never see their children again. And these are not evil, wicked men. There are bad men out there. We know that. But these are not the ones that we're talking about. These are good men that are godly, that are whole. They may be more passive than they should be. And yet they're the ones that are easily controlled by the reviling wife and by the white knight pastor.
okay?
Because he's typically not going to fight back. He's going to go, okay, I must be really blind, and I must be really prideful because everybody sees that I'm the problem. I don't understand how I'm the problem. I'm not doing these things. So this is the dynamic that goes on, and it is devastating. It is absolutely devastating. So now you think about it, that if this dynamic has happened with the marriage, with the children, now it's going to perpetuate in a whole new generation. So in other words, the little boy and the little girl that grow up in this environment, they see that their father is a bad man because of what everybody says. So now it affects the little boys saying, okay, I've got to be more passive and effeminate. And then the little girls thinking, I've got to be more aggressive and tough. And it just perpetuates the whole problem, a whole nother generation. So we really have to get this right. We have to put a stop to this because it is devastating. And I keep using the word epidemic, and it's not an exaggeration. My counseling is almost solely in this area now because there's so many people that are struggling with this today.
And you said it's like roughly 80% of probably the couples that you see like that.
Yeah,
Um, one of the
might even be higher than that now. So
okay,
yes,
yeah. Well, one of the things I think you have a point when it comes to just the passive man, because I've tended to notice that when I was reading the book, obviously there's varying degrees of the reviling wife where it could be just sheer unsubmissiveness versus, like you said, false accusations. And I've had a friend, a good friend, where it was just most passive, nonchalant guy, and then out of the blue, accused of hitting one of the kids. And he's like, I've never done this. And it does make you wonder. It's like, where is that coming from? Like, I think part of the problem too is women aren't held accountable, that when something like that is
right,
deemed to be false, like it's completely false accusation.
correct,
And
correct,
it's, but I think that's the problem though. They feel like they have a warrant to make false accusations, false police reports. And then if they just get a slap on the wrist, it's like, well, what's to stop this from happening again to men over and over again?
correct.
And, but I do think that, the reviling wife, I do think that some women who are a little bit over domineering tend to pick passive men, and it's almost like because they know that they can control them. And I've
Correct.
talked to my wife about this, where I think that like we have discussions about this, and one of the things I said that I tend to notice with some men where after a while it's what the woman wants, but before long they almost lose respect for their husbands. But it almost seems like they think that that's what they want, but then when they get in a relationship like that, it's almost like, well, they're almost become interested in other men because they see them as more masculine. Do you
See,
do you
that's
find that, or do you think that they just prefer that type of guy where they're just passive and they just want to stay
yeah.
with that type of guy?
I mean, I agree with the first part of what you said. I think
Okay.
a strong, aggressive wife is going to seek out a passive man like that. I think
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. And likewise, I think works the other way. The passive man is probably seeking out an aggressive wife as well. Says, okay, I want a wife that's, she knows what she wants, and and I'll just kind of fit in there, but I'll be the figurehead as the leader. But I would disagree with the part where I think the wife loses respect for the husband because he won't lead. I don't think that's the case,
Okay.
because what I've seen over and over again is when I'm in one of these situations and the man starts to lead and he starts to take authority in his home in a godly way, the wife does not just say, "Oh, good, that's what I wanted all along." She fights him even harder now. See, we have to be giving the responsibility to the person that's in sin, not blame the other person for the sin. So, in other words, the wife is already harsh and bitter and controlling. That's not because the husband is passive. That's
Okay.
because of her own hard heart.
Yeah. That
Because
makes
if we
sense.
say, well, it's because he's not doing his job the right way, then we're like, well, now we're kind of doing the white knight thing, aren't we? We're saying, well, you're to blame, husband, for what she's doing. It's like we don't want to do that. We say, husband, if you're in sin, and if a husband is so passive he won't lead his life, that is sin. That is. But if the wife is insisting on being controlling and dominating and saying, no, it's going to be the way I want it to be, she's in sin. Don't blame the guy, for her sin. Don't blame her for his sin either. So so I would keep those two things separate and say, no, let's keep the responsibility where God does.
Kind
Yeah.
of I kinda wanted to go back to, I thought you brought this up several times in the book, and I thought it was a really good point. And depending on what translation of the Bible you read, where, in Genesis 3:16, you talk about, I'll just read the passage real quick. To the
Sure.
woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. But then I've also noticed, and I think that you mentioned in the older ESV translations, that it says, Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, and he
Correct.
shall rule over you. So I think that that's quite of a difference in understanding of like, if her desire is contrary to her husband, some of the women that kind of operate more solely on their feelings and a little bit more of wanting to control the man.
Right.
So there's going to be that power dynamic where one's going to want to lead. And yeah, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts. Like, do you think that that is the accurate translation or how it should be understood? Is that the desire should be contrary to the husband?
Yeah, I just kind of happened on that issue by accident because
Okay.
I had a an ESV that was from let's see, 20 from 2016 to 2024. The ESV translated Genesis 3:16 as your desire shall be contrary to your husband. And all the other ones say shall be for your husband, desire before your husband. And I go, huh, I wonder why they changed it. And then in 2025, when my book White Nights was coming out, they changed it back again. So in other words,
Okay.
it said your desire should be for your husband. Then it said contrary to your husband. And then they went back to for your husband.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
go, what happened was some effeminate scholars got in there and said, "Oh no, you can't say contrary to. That's too offensive." Now, these are all just opinions of mine. Obviously, I can't prove this, But I go, why would they change it back? And
Well, there was kind of like a parallel, right? Because a chapter or two later with Cain.
Genesis 4:7, right? Genesis 4:7, the same thing, same words, same word group is there. That sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. It makes no sense that its desire is for you, except in the sense of it's for you in the sense of it wants to control you. So the interesting thing is conservative scholars have always looked at Genesis 3:16 that its desire, her desire is for her husband as being a bad thing, not a good thing. It's part of the
Yeah.
fall.
So
But they,
even if it
but they,
was that translation
even if it
of
was that,
okay.
they still look at it that way. They just kind of massage it and say, well, for in a sense of against and all that. It's like, okay, that's kind of strange. So even with the other translation, your desire should be for your husband. They still look at it. Well, this is part of the fall because this is the curse. This is what's happened as a result of sin in the world. And the same with the Genesis 4:7 passage that sin's desire is for you. For you in what way? For controlling you, for overcoming you, for taking over your life. It's certainly not sin wants to bless you. Sin wants to be kind to you. Sin wants to be loving towards you. It's always the opposite. The ESV got it right for 9 years there. And I thought, wow, good, that's great. And then, I mean, literally just as my book was going to be published, they changed it back. And I thought, wow. So I put a footnote.
They knew your book was coming out. No, I'm
They knew it
just
was coming out, right? Well, I had actually addressed it 10 years earlier in The Abusive Wife. I had actually said that this is the way that could be translated, contrary to your husband. And then the ESV did change it, and I thought, oh, good. I guess I was going the right way. And so initially it was, and then they changed it back, and I go, wow, the power of the translators is pretty strong, and it can really change the way people view God's word. Now, just to clarify, I think the ESV is the best English translation we have. I love the I love the ESV. I love the NASB. I love the Legacy Standard Bible. I think they're excellent translations. The New King James is a very good one too. Um, I prefer the ESV. It reads easier. I think it clarifies a lot of things, but it has other weaknesses in it too. There's no perfect translation, but that's a major failing in my mind. I go, boy, the fact that they changed that back to appeal to a more feminist view is very concerning to me. Why would they do that? And my opinion again is it was because of pressure that you can't say these things. This is not allowed.
well, I guess it's could be speculative. I mean, it could be they thought that that's the faithful translation, or it could be like you say, maybe they did feel pressure because maybe other translations have it that way, and maybe they kind of felt that pressure that hey, maybe this is the more accurate reading or translation of the text. One of the things I noticed that you kind of mentioned in the book about like how Paul kind of grounds like male headship in sort of this the creation order. So,
Right.
so for example, First Timothy 2:11 through 13, it says, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first and then Eve. And I did think that that's kind of interesting to, like that I was wrapping up your book, and then there's all this kind of controversy going on with Albert Mohler and the SBC right now, because it sounds like that I don't know a ton about the SBC, but I do know that they Albert Mohler is basically trying to solidify, like in their rules or laws, that women are not allowed to preach in their denomination. So I thought
Right.
that that was kind of interesting. But why do you think? Why do you think that Paul consistently grounds like male headship in the creation order?
Yeah, I think the reason he grounds it in that is because this is not a cultural issue. It's not something that's, well, according to your culture, then you determine what's the right thing to do. If you ground it in creation order, in other words, Genesis chapter 3, then it's permanent. It's eternal. It never gets overturned. It never, we don't get more enlightened and say, oh, now women can be educated so they can preach and teach just like men do. It's not about education. It's not about culture. It's about creation order. And and to undermine that is basically to undermine the authority of Scripture itself. It's to say that, well, anything that we disagree with, we can say, well, that was a cultural thing. That's a very dangerous slope to go on to.
Well, and I think that the idea of that kind of naturally leads me into like the idea of submission, where I feel like it's perceived in such a negative light. And I bring up about how since Christ, God the Son submits to God the
Correct.
Father, but we know they're co-equal, co-eternal, and all of the same essence. So I don't think it necessarily means that there's an equality of value among you know what I mean, among God the Father and God the Son, nor the husband and the wife, because we're obviously men and women are both image bearers of God. Um, why do you think it is that like Adam is, even though Eve is guilty of her sin and God judges her for it, but it almost seems like he holds the man to a higher standard, or at least because that happened under his
Right.
authority, that he is still responsible
Hmm.
for it. Can you maybe speak to that a
Yeah,
little
I
bit?
think it's exactly for that reason the man is held responsible because he's the head of his home. Adam was, you are, I am. We are responsible. Now, if our wives continue in sin, even after being confronted and said, this is not right, this is disobedience to God, if they continue on unrepentant, we don't keep blaming the guy. It's not the same as guilt and blame. It's not that we're, okay, the wife keeps sinning and now the guy is always to blame. That wouldn't be right. Because notice, even in the passage you mentioned in 1 Timothy 4, chapter 2, verse 14, it says, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So it's clearly saying she was in sin. So it's not that, well, she couldn't help herself because her husband didn't protect her. She has, the freedom to sin just like Adam did, and she did. So it's not only a lack of submission to the husband, but it's a lack of submission to God and God's order. That's where we keep coming back to it. It's not so much that the wife is disobeying her husband and saying, I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't care what you think. That's not just rebellion against her family and her husband. That's ultimately rebellion against God. And that's very serious because God is the one that sets these laws and rules in order. And they're not oppressive. They're not too hard. They're not too weighty. They're not too difficult. They may be difficult in a very feminized society because women are told you can do anything you want. You go, girl. You you tell people whatever you want is okay. And that makes it harder for a woman today saying, I'm not going to put up with a man telling me what to do. I'm as smart as he is. I've got just as much of a powerful job as he does. Why does he think he could tell me what to do? And yet that same woman, she will obey her boss in her job. She'll submit to her boss. She won't argue and fight with him. She won't resist him because she'll lose her job. But then she goes home to her husband and she says, I don't have to listen to you. And I go, no, don't you see the disconnect there? Don't you see the inconsistency and actual hypocrisy there, that you'll submit to this man that you're not related to, that you're not married to, but you will not submit to this man who's your husband, who is your head, who is the patriarch in your family? Don't you see the rebellion in that? And yet women have had this drilled into their heads. You can do it all. You can have it all. And it is deadly. It is damaging families. It is damaging children. And it's ripping homes apart.
Well, I think when they see or think of submission, like even from a biblical perspective, I think that a lot of women, and certainly not all, but like a lot of women probably are fearful that like he's going to be authoritarian, he's going to be domineering, he's going to be a
Hmm.
bully. And I think that that's like the real concern. So what would you say is like, how do you distinguish like authority from like more of a domination, domineering type attitude that a man can have? Like what are things that women could look out for if they run into that type of
Yeah,
man?
I
Like,
I think any man has the temptation to abuse his authority. So, in other words, just do what I say, no matter how ridiculous it is, and you just have to submit to every unreasonable request that I make. But the difficulty is that some of the wives will say, "Well, he's being unreasonable because he wants to buy a Chevy and I want a Ford." And you go, well, that's not an unreasonable thing. I mean, it doesn't matter what you thought, which is a better car or not. This is what your husband desires. Then you follow your husband. You don't fight him on that. So, but if any woman is in physical danger, she's being, beaten or slapped or kicked or hit or something's going on with the husband, then of course, get out of that relationship. Don't even get into one, of course, but Um, we're not telling women to be doormats. We're not telling women to just roll over and just do anything any man ever says. But what we are saying is that this should be your natural way of viewing your marriage. How many times in scripture does it say the wife is to submit in everything to her husband? Ephesians 5 says that, Colossians 3 says that, Titus 2 says that, 1 Peter 3 says that. This should be her predisposition. This should be her default position, that I will submit to my husband. Because,
yeah. And it was surprising when you brought up, like, I had not thought about the passage where Peter basically praises Sarah for her obedience to
correct,
Abraham. And even though Abraham wasn't always in the right, as clearly evident from some of the
right,
decisions he's made,
right,
he made, she was still submissive to him, and it wasn't based upon um, her only being submissive when she thought Abraham was in the right, but even when
even
he
when
was
he's
in
in
the
the wrong,
wrong.
right. Yeah, because this puts it in the category of being submissive to God. This is the man that you've chosen to be your husband, and you follow him. You submit to him, even if he's disobedient to the word. That's what 1 Peter 3:1 says. And you notice that he may be won over without a word when he sees your respectful and pure conduct. Respectful. And that was Sarah, right? Sarah was respectful to Abraham, even when he was evidently going the wrong direction. I mean, he's trying to give his wife away to two different kings. And yet Sarah is the one person that Peter chose as an example of a submissive wife with a husband that was disobedient to God's word. I think Sarah is the feminist's nightmare, because the feminists would never tolerate putting up with kind of behavior that Sarah did. They say, "Oh, she was just an idiot. Why would she do that? She was a fool. She was a doormat." No, she was honored by God, because notice what else he says: if you do good and do not fear anything that's frightening. This is, 1 Peter 3, verse 6. She obeyed Abraham. Again, not just submitted, but obeyed Abraham. So this is even a stronger word, calling him Lord. So there's a verbal submission to him. And you are her children, wives, if you do good and do not fear anything that's frightening. I'm sure that there are frightening situations that many women get into. It's like, oh man, my husband is making this decision. I don't think it's a good one. Well, talk to him about it. Have a reasonable discussion with him about it. Don't scream at him and yell at him. Don't argue with him, but talk to him about it. But ultimately, don't give in to the fear. Don't let fear rule in your heart, wife. Now, again, see, you're going to have people that say, oh, they're just giving permission to these men to beat up women. Absolutely not. That's just foolish to think that That's not what Peter is thinking about. That's not what Paul is thinking about. That's not
No.
what Jesus is thinking about. That's not what anything in Scripture is saying. But what happens is people try to nuance this and say, well, submission, but. And I go, well, isn't it funny that the inspired scriptures don't have to nuance this? They make the point and say, this is what you should be doing. And not, well, but this, but that, but here. It's like anybody in their right mind would say, you don't just let a husband beat you up. Well, I'm submitting to him. Well, now you're disobeying God because, you're endangering your whole family. So, but it's used to deflect the attention away from the main biblical principle. The main biblical principle, and it's one of the chapters in my book, submission is not a dirty word. It's not about, see, you and I have to submit to God, don't we? And yet sometimes God has put us through things in life that we go, wow, really, Lord? That's what you wanted me to do? Okay. You can fight God on that, or you can say, God, I submit to your will.
Well, and I like how you kind of repeatedly mention about how for the men, about what Paul says about love your wife, the way that Christ
Right.
loves the church. And so I think that if men follow after that model and have that sacrificial love, then I believe that women shouldn't have to fear um, their husband being overly domineering, overly tyrannical in the household if he is truly following after Christ. One of the things I kind of had thought
But
of, and I'm
just to
curious to get
clarify
your.
on that again,
Go ahead.
Zechariah, I don't want to agree with you, but just keep remembering that the men I'm talking about, the typical man, he is loving his wife like Christ loves the church. He's not a tyrannical man. He's not an oppressive man. And these women still will not follow him. It's still not enough. It's still, no, husband, you have to do what I want you to do. So we just want to be careful with that because we've kind of been trained into thinking, well, if he's a godly man, any woman will follow him. And I go, no, it's not true. I'd like to think it's true, but it's simply not. We've got to be honest and hold the wife accountable. And even the next verse after Ephesians 5:25, husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church, gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. See, I think that applies to Christ with his church. I think that applies to the husband with his wife. That's his goal. That's what it means to love your spouse. That's what it means for Christ to love you and me. He's going to continue to cleanse us by the washing of water with the word. He's not going to just let us do whatever we want to do. He's going to discipline us. And likewise, a husband should do the same with his wife. I love you, but I'm not just going to let you do anything you want. That's not love. That's permissiveness. That's licentiousness. In the same way it would be with our children. Do we let our children just do whatever they want because it's what they think is best? Well, you don't love me, Dad, because you won't let me, have a cell phone when I'm 10 years old. Sorry, son, I don't think that's a good idea. And I say that because I love you, not because I hate you. So the same dynamic happens with the wife that, well, if you really love me, you'll let me have my way. And a godly husband is going to say, I do love you, but I cannot just let you have your way with this. It would not be right of me. I would not be honoring God. I would not be blessing you. I want you to grow. Sanctification is about growth. And that's what passage is talking about. Ephesians 5:26 is sanctifying her, not just letting her do what she wants. So sorry I interrupted you on that, but I wanted to catch
No,
that.
no, you're okay. No, I appreciate it. What I wanted to say was that, um, actually, I had a couple questions for you from like a practical standpoint when it comes to like real world. So you have men and women that marry each other from different Christian backgrounds. And one of the things I kind of struggle with understanding or trying to find a right path for is, like, for example, me and my wife come from different Christian traditions. There was a gentleman I met up with a couple weeks ago, had coffee, super nice guy from church. And his wife was she was, I think, Mennonite. And as a result, she doesn't really go to his church. And I was curious to get your perspective on that, like, because you have to, it feels like a balancing act, right? Because I feel like the woman should be submissive and go to the church that the husband believes is the right
Correct.
church. And obviously, I'm biased, but I also think, too, at the same time, that there's a very real Protestant ethic of like the liberty of conscience and that we shouldn't compel people against their conscience. Um, so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, and then maybe we can talk about Numbers 30. And I know that, if we're tight
Yeah.
on time, let me know when you need to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But yeah, love to
We've
hear
got
your
about
thoughts on
5
that.
minutes, but thank you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree with you on that, I can understand that spouses coming from different backgrounds, different church backgrounds. I've run into that many times with people I've counseled. And what I always encourage them is that before you get married, you should make this clear that, okay, wife, you're going to follow your husband in everything, not just the things that you want to follow him in or you think he's right in, but you should follow him in everything. That includes, should we have children or not? How many children? Where should we live? Um, and what church we attend. Because you want the whole family to be together in worshiping the Lord together in unity. It's a wonderful example for the children, but it's also just preserving in the home as well. But a wife that's going to one church and a husband going to another church, there's a big problem there already. That's what's going on, what's happened, and it is an issue of submission that um, the wife should be following her husband there. Now, if he's not going to church, for instance, the husband is saying, "I'm not going to church, and I want you to go to church." That's when a wife can respectfully disagree with her husband and say, I would ask that you allow me to go to the church and take the children with me to go to church. Please don't prevent me from doing that. And that's where she should take a stand and say, I'm not going to just disobey that way and just dishonor my Lord. But often that's a very rare case. I'm not sure I've ever run into that case, but it's usually that the wife says, well, I like my church, and the husband says, I like my church. And they never have a conversation about it before they get married. And I go, why didn't you talk about it? I mean, you talked about your friend that was it Mennonite or Amish? You said that
I think he said his wife was grew up
Mennonite.
Mennonite, so they were strict. Yeah, and he was a different
Yeah. So,
denomination.
so I would
Um,
I would look at that and I say, okay, you should have talked about that ahead of time before you got married. You both knew this. Okay, let's say that you didn't. Let's say you thought, well, I didn't think it was an issue, and now I understand these things more clearly. This brings in another area that a wife should be looking to her husband to continue to grow in biblical understanding and truths. So let's say that they were both Mennonites when they got married. And okay, we're both going to go to the Mennonite church. And the husband says, you know what? I'm not convinced that's God's way anymore. I think the Presbyterian or the Baptist way is right. The wife should follow him. She still should follow him
okay.
because presumably he's growing in his understanding and he's seeing the scriptures more clearly now. A wife should be loving that and saying, I'm glad my husband is learning more. I'm glad my husband is growing more. I want that from him. I don't want him to stay the same. I've been a believer for 43 years, and I've changed some of my views in those 43 years. And,
Yeah, I've definitely changed
and
some of
hopefully
mine.
I change them for the better.
Yeah,
But my wife has followed me.
yeah.
She says, I follow you. Now, I'm a pastor too, so it's not like she's got really the option of going to another church. But the point remains that a husband should be growing in his understanding, in his biblical discernment, and saying, I believe this is God's direction for us as a family. Please follow me with that. Not barking order, not saying, you better do this or else, but, please just follow me. And when a wife will follow her husband like that, that husband falls even more in love with his wife. He says, I have just got a wonderful, precious jewel of a wife. He doesn't look at that and say, well, good, now I can control her in other areas. A godly man's going to look at that and say, what a great gift. That's what the proverb says, right? That's a gift, an excellent wife who can find. She's more precious than gold. That's that's the excellent wife, the one that says, I'm going to follow my husband. I'm going to submit to my husband. I want to honor and support my husband. I want to be I want to be right behind my husband and the biggest cheerleader he has. See, that cuts totally against what our culture says today. Our culture says today, woman, you don't need a man to make it in this world. You could do it on your own. So basically, they're trying to turn women into men. And the one thing that these women have in common is they're very discontent. They're very unhappy. They're very miserable. And many of them never have children. And
which is which is surprising because they get, a lot of times if they do marry, then they do get their way. But at the same time, there was a really good quote, and I from your book, and I think that we could probably end
okay.
here. Um, was you had mentioned that the point here is that the fear has taken hold of
Right.
this woman. This stronghold in this sense of 2 Corinthians 10:4 causes the reviling wife to walk in the flesh and wage war according to the flesh. She is deceived, desperately trying to fight this battle in her soul with the wrong weapons. She attempts to overcome her anxieties through her own strength of will and her reasoning powers. Eventually, she resorts to control because her own fear is
Correct.
controlling her. And I thought that that was very true and very ironic to think that the idea of a reviling wife wanting to control her husband and control everything around her. And then in reality, it kind of backfires because she's the one who's truly being controlled by
Correct.
fear.
Her own feelings have become sovereign. That's all that matters in her mind. Her feelings rule in her heart. They take control, and that's all that matters to her. And the husband says, I just don't agree with that. I want to hear your input. I want to hear what you have to say, but I don't believe that's the right way. And now, because the wife has that stronghold of fear and that insistence on control, now she's going to get angry because her husband won't do what she wants. And then the husband says, well, I can't just submit to you and do whatever you want because I don't think that's the right way. And then the anger increases, marriage gets fractured, and then we're right back in the white knight and reviling wife situation. So
Well, I really appreciate your time. I know we're running out of time, and I want to be respectful of
thank you.
that. I definitely feel like we could have a ton more to talk about because I probably made it halfway through my notes, and I thoroughly love the book. If anyone's interested, I picked it up from New Christendom Press. It's called White Knights and Reviling Wives, and I believe that this is your
Yes,
fifth
yes,
book.
it
Is that
is.
correct?
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
that book is
Okay.
only available on newchristendompress.com. My other 4 books are all available on amazon.com. So, but
Okay.
thank you,
Awesome.
Zechariah. Thank you for having me on the show. If you want to have me back and talk about other things, I'd be glad to come back.
I would love that. I greatly appreciate it, and this is a serious topic and one that I definitely think we should dive into more. And just, I'm really grateful for just everything that you do, and just defending men that really need to be defended,
Yeah.
and that have been mistreated by not only their spouses but also, unfortunately, the church. So, yeah, thank you again, Dr. Edgington. I'll
Very
see you next
welcome.
time.
Thank you. God bless.